from Studio 1A in Rockefeller Plaza.
And good morning. Welcome to Today on a Friday morning. I'm Matt Lauer.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Savannah Guthrie along with Al Roker and Natalie Morales. And this, of course, is a solemn day in our national history. 50 years ago today, President John F. Kennedy was gunned down in
You will be there in
the eternal flame still
less
burns
than
at
2
Arlington
months.
National Cemetery this morning.
Over at the White House, you'll see the flag has been lowered, as it will be lowered or has been lowered at other sites around the country. This is the day that people say an age of innocence ended. Certainly was the end of a period known as Camelot in this country, and we all can think about where we were, at least those of us who were alive at that time.
I remember in third grade at PS 272, and they brought us all into the auditorium. And it's the first time you saw just strangers crying on the street.
It is, of course, our top story today. NBC's Lester Holt is in Dallas this morning. Lester, good morning to you.
Matt, good morning. I'm coming to you from atop of what became known as the grassy knoll here at Dealey Plaza. You may recall the pictures of people huddled on the ground when the shots were fired. If I walk over here, this is the podium where Abraham Zapruder stood with his Bell and Howell camera, capturing the only film evidence of the assassination itself as the presidential motorcade drove by. And in the center of the plaza is where 5,000 ticket holders will gather later today to honor the memory of President Kennedy. There will be songs, there will be speeches and tributes. Around 12:30 at the time the president was shot, there will be a moment of silence followed by the ringing of bells across the city as Dallas remembers. Dealey Plaza remains virtually the same as it was in 1963. Even the building that overlooks it from where the shots were fired still stands.
Somewhere along the 50 years, someone could have said, you know what, let's erase this, let's start anew.
There were a lot of people who said that back in those days, and that's why there was a lot of democracy going on back then about how we want to remake Dallas.
Mayor Mike Rawlings says today's ceremony is again about Dallas choosing to not distance itself from its tragic place in history, as if the daily stream of tourists who stroll the plaza would allow anyone to forget.
I'll tell you one more story. You guys probably haven't heard of Anita Bryant. She was the orange juice lady, sold orange juice, Florida orange juice. Very big spokesman for that in the 60s. Tom Landry, the coach of the Dallas Cowboys forever. Both those people, after this assassination, petitioned to have the Texas School Book Depository leveled. They thought it was such a negative influence on the city of Dallas that they pushed hard to have that building leveled and the memory of this assassination to go away. I think historically it was fortunate they did not listen to it.
Very moving. It's still very moving.
The white X's that for years have marked the spots where the president was struck were paved over on Thursday. Today is about remembering JFK, not his murder.
We just want to honor him.
Ruth Altshuler is chair of today's tribute. In 1963, she was among those awaiting the president's arrival at the Trade Mart.
Everybody was wondering what happened when the press ran in and ran out, and he got up and he said, I have some very sad news. He said, the president has been shot.
Today, part of the speech Kennedy didn't live to deliver will be unveiled on a monument in Dealey Plaza. Reading in part, we in this country, in this generation, are by destiny rather than choice, the watchmen on the walls of world freedom. Many of those gathering today were also among the last to see Kennedy alive.
He looked at me and kind of nodded and waved like, I see you. And for a 13-year-old kid, that's huge. Yeah, of course.
That enthusiasm and hope JFK engendered is what Dallas remembers today.
Do for your country.
It's a sad day to remember that day, but we have to take those emotions and channel it into something that is better for our city and hopefully better for America as well.
The featured speaker here today, a historian and author, David McCullough. He will read excerpts from some of JFK's speeches. And Matt and Savannah, we should point out that there's been a dramatic change in the weather here. Temperatures plunged overnight, so a very chilly and likely rainy day today when that ceremony gets underway.
Lester Holt in Dallas. Lester, thanks so much. And coming up, Tom Brokaw and Dan Rather will join us with their reflections on that day. Tom spoke with a host of people who were there, including one of the doctors who treated the president at Parkland Hospital. And Dan was on the scene covering the news as it unfolded. And then a little later today, NBC News will have special coverage of the moment of silence at 1:25 Eastern, 10:25 Pacific time.
All right. Meantime, Al is following a...
What's that, Mace?
Those X's aren't there anymore now?
They are now. They just took them out for that day because they just wanted the memory to be more about the president than his death.
White House Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff has just announced that President Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, which is about 35 minutes ago.
Well, that was the moment on NBC 50 years ago today. Frank McGee, sitting next to Chet Huntley, relaying the tragic news that President Kennedy was shot in Dallas. Morning, everyone. 7:30 now on a Friday morning, November 22nd, 2013, a solemn day on our calendar.
Now, we've all had to be at this desk and relay difficult news, but imagine the feeling they were having at that moment, listening on the phone and having to tell America that the Americans that their president was dead.
It's hard to even fathom how they kept it together. And coming up, we're going to actually talk to Dan Rather and Tom Brokaw, a couple of journalists who were there covering the news that day. But first, let's look at...
Yeah, I just skipped through this so we can...
Is what's trending today. Of course, the event that is getting the most attention today is the 50th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Tonight, on an NBC News special, Tom Brokaw asks eyewitnesses, politicians, journalists, and celebrities, where were you?
I remember exactly what I was doing and where it was.
I was a senior in high school. It was right after lunch.
I was embarrassed.
I was in school.
I was coming home from the studio.
I was walking down the hall at UCLA Law School.
I was on the shuttle getting off on 42nd in Lexington.
I was on a bus going from Colby to New Haven for the Harvard-Yale game.
I was playing in the Harvard-Yale soccer game.
I was in school. I was in class.
In 1963, Dr. Robert Grossman was a 31-year-old neurosurgeon at Parkland Hospital.
When we got downstairs, we could see limos, police cars, ambulance at the entrance to the emergency room.
So you run into a room, and there's a gurney.
There was the President of the United States, lying motionless, surrounded by physicians. It was clear that he had a severe head wound. There was a great deal of bleeding from his head.
At the hospital were two Catholic priests. Dan Rather somehow got them on the phone and asked,
has the president been shot? They said, yes, the president been shot and the president's dead. The president's dead. I mean, what a hammer to the heart and the psyche.
Seeing the president dying in front of you the feeling is one of awe. Everyone was concerned, everyone was concentrating on the medical aspect, but I think everyone was concerned, what did this mean for the country? Was this the start of World War III?
Lunch with the guy who owns it. There is also a companion book to the special, Where Were You? America Remembers the JFK Assassination. Tom Brokaw is with us now, along with Access TV's Dan Rather, who was in Dallas 50 years ago today. What a pleasure to see you guys. Good morning.
Good morning.
So we'll go to the Where Were You? You were in Dallas. Where in Dallas, Dan?
I was headquartered at our KRLD CBS affiliate, but at the time
I probably would rank this guy, Dan Rather, as maybe the third best. I mean, they're bringing in the big hitters here. Walter Cronkite has passed away, probably the only reason he's not in the interview. And that doctor, have you ever heard of him before? Didn't mention him, did I? That doctor just spoke. No, why is he speaking and why aren't those others speaking? They're all dead. Yeah. It's you got to remember this was 50 years ago, and these people were in their 30s and 40s.
assassination, I was just past the railroad overpass, the car underpass, just beyond the school book depository where the motorcade was to officially end.
And Tom?
I was in Omaha. I was on duty. I was a morning news editor, and the bells began to go crazy on the teletype machine. I wandered over and couldn't believe what I still remember my mindset. This doesn't happen in America, and it's going to change it somehow. That was my immediate thought. We shot a president, and this president put it on the air because the network in those days gave back to the affiliates noon hour for local programming. I interrupted a garden program to announce the president had been assassinated.
So many people talk about how the nation changed that day, and people use the phrase lost its innocence. Do you agree with that assessment? I was thinking of here's a country that had just been through World War II.
Well, what a good point. I agree with it up to a point. that we didn't believe assassinations would happen here. Yes, we had 3 previous presidents assassinated, Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley, but we believed that was all in the past. Assassinations was something that happened in the Balkans or perhaps somewhere in Asia. In that sense, we lost our innocence. But it's a bit overstated because the country had been through the Great Depression, World War II, the Korean War, so to call us innocent was not quite, I think, accurate. But when President Kennedy talked about the torch being passed, I think that's how the nation changed. He was the first president born in the 20th century, first president who was a Roman Catholic. He was the next to youngest man to go into the presidency, only Theodore Roosevelt. All of that, the nation was turning young. We had a young, vibrant president, and that's how the torch was passed. And in that sense, we moved forward into the future.
There was something else going on. At the same time, I completely agree with what Dan says. It was the arrival of television. He was a very familiar figure to people because he was in their living room every night in a way no president before him had been. So people felt a connection to him in some way. And he was perfectly cast for this new medium. Charismatic, great looking, and he knew how to use it. So I think a combination of all those things made that this riveting moment for people. And it was so unexpected. He seemed invulnerable to us.
I'm going to say he was the first television president. We had television during the Truman and Eisenhower presidencies. But there weren't that many television sets in the country. As he came into the presidency, television was becoming the dominant means of communication in the country, and he was tailor-made for television. He was also the first, I would say, Hollywood president. His family had great connections to Hollywood. He had this star aura about him, and he was the first president to bring modern second half of the 20th century marketing techniques to the presidency.
When you think of moments that resonate like that moment resonated, Pearl Harbor, the assassination of JFK, 9/11 that we all covered afterward. You went back and you talked to a wide variety of people for this special. Were you surprised at how emotional they still got recounting their stories from that day?
Yeah, I think I was, and I think especially in a generational sense, the people who were his age or just a little bit younger, a little bit older, felt connected to him. And the possibilities seemed endless because he was going to talk about going to the moon. And he always would say, we go because, not because it's easy, because it's hard. He was challenging the country, and we were coming out of the more soporific years of the 1950s with Dwight Eisenhower, who did a lot of great things. But John Kennedy came determined to reactivate the American spirit, and people felt a part of that. The boomers were not yet of age, but there were a lot of people my age, I was 20 when he was elected, who felt this is the kind of leader we're going to have for the rest of my life. Somehow we're going to be challenged in a different way, and we're no longer expected to just go stand in line and wait our turn. That young people can take hold of this country and make a difference.
This moment, of course, has endured in our collective psyche, and part of that is because there are still people that are very suspicious. They still believe there may be more to this story than Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone, shooting from the school book depository. I'm just curious, Dan, what you make of that.
Well, it's understandable. This is America, after all, and we love to doubt as well as to know. And I don't have any argument with anybody who thinks it was otherwise than Lee Harvey Oswald or some conspiracy.
Do you have any doubts?
I love to doubt as well as to know, but I do believe one gun, one shooter. I think it was Lee Harvey Oswald, the shooter. I do not believe that he was part of a conspiracy, but I'm open if somebody comes forward with convincing evidence or testimony. I have an open mind.
Tom, that's where I am as well.
You have an open mind, but I'm going to say this again. For 50 years, now 54 years almost, conspiracy theorists have been telling non-conspiracy theorists to prove there was not a conspiracy. But 54 years later, they still cannot prove there was one. So I think people are open. Hell, I'm open. If there was really a conspiracy, I'd really like to know about it after all these years. But it just doesn't hold sand with me.
Well, I think that Lee Harvey Oswald pointedly shot him, fired 3 shots. Was there a dotted line to some other force of some kind? You know, Lyndon Johnson always believed that the Cubans had something to do with it, in part because the Kennedy people were trying to get rid of Castro, and I mean get rid of him. They had
You hear that? And that's going to tie in a little bit to what I think happened at the end. I think there might, I don't think the Cubans did it, but I'm just going to, that'll make some sense. What he's saying is that Lyndon Johnson always thought Cuba had something to do with it because we're so after Fidel Castro. And why would he not retaliate?
Secret committee that was working on eliminating him as not just the leader of Cuba, but taking him out altogether.
Tom Brokaw, Dan Rather, as I said, what a pleasure to have you guys here.
Well, you know what you're going to do with your Friday night now. So from 9 to 11, you'll be in front of the television.
I was going to tease it, but you just did a pretty good job. Actually, it says tonight at 9/8 Central Time, right here on Today, Where Were You the Day JF?
Okay, I hope you're enjoying these. It just gives you some different perspective. Now I'm going to show you one more short. It's only about 5 minutes long. How do you think the people that were working in the White House felt after hearing about the assassination of the president? That's what this is. Aftermath of the people that were working in the White House. Different types of people and their reaction to this news. This is kind of a short, but it's very, very good.
When I did that last biography on Castro, it said there'd been something like 632 attempted assassinations that are pretty
well documented. Everything from trying to shoot him to try to poison him. I mean, people did not like Castro. And just like you remember in the movie, they were talking about bombing Cuba, and Kenneth Donald says, well, let's bomb the S out of them. You know, you want to. You know, we sure feel good about it. That's really what we wanted to do, but politics didn't allow it. So Lee Harvey Oswald, I'll give you a little bit of a preview. Lee Harvey Oswald actually defected to Russia. And he came back to the United States, married a Russian wife, and came back to the United States and tried to get into, he went to Mexico and he went to the embassy in Mexico and he went to the Cuban embassy and tried to get a passport back to Cuba before the assassination, and he tried to get another passport back to Russia prior to the assassination. And they told him to pound sand. I believe he came back and was going to prove a point to these two countries that, hey, I'll do something for you, and in return, I want to get into these countries. And we'll talk more about that later. So this guy, and this is why I don't want to miss all this stuff on Oswald, because you have to know the man to understand this at all. He was an interesting dude, to say the least. He didn't amount to much, but he had a lot of idiosyncrasies in him that you would never understand unless you saw it. But let's see how the White House staff adjusted here.
Friday morning, 11:37. The President's jet lands at the Dallas airport. Love Field.
The White House has been home to some of our nation's most painful tragedies, and the White House staff has to work even as they grieve.
Several thousand enthusiastic Texans are on hand to give the President and Mrs. Kennedy a warm welcome.
Usher Nelson Pierce will never forget that tragic Friday in November 1963.
At 12:45, I got to the East Gate, and the police officer said, "Pierce, hurry and get to the office. The boss has just been shot."
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route. There's numerous people running up the hill alongside Elm Street, there by the Simmons Freeway.
When I got to the office, of course, TV was on. We were watching everything. And I was the one that actually got the call from Texas that his death was official. And Rex Scouten said, call the engineers and have them lower the flag on the house. So I called the engineers, and then I called GSA Flag Control Center and told them the death was official, to have all flags on ships at sea, embassies all over the world, fly the flags at half-staff for 30 days.
Within minutes, flags all over the country were lowered to half-staff.
And that got me right here. And for 30 days I had a problem because I was the one that gave the order to have all those flags flown at half-staff.
All over the world came from him.
After Air Force One departed Dallas, Mrs. Kennedy had her secretary call us and tell us that she wanted the funeral as much like Abraham Lincoln's as possible. The ushers got in touch with the curator's office immediately, and the curators got in touch with the Library of Congress. And the amount of research that went on in a matter of just a few hours was incredible.
Went up in the East Room and helped the people drape the black batten around the chandeliers in the East Room and set up the casket podium, and was there when the casket was brought in before the review of the First Lady.
Everything was done as close to Lincoln's funeral as we could do it, even down to the decoration of the White House in black crepe.
But the White House staff couldn't plan for everything, especially their own feelings.
The night when they brought him back and put him in the East Room, that's when it really set in that he was really gone. And seeing Miss Kiddington when she came in, that was a really sad time. That's when it really hits you.
I saw Mrs. Kennedy coming down the hall from the East Room and wondered what I would say to her when she came around the corner to the elevator. And it was a time when our eyes met as she came around the corner, and there was a rapport between us that I had never known, and I knew I didn't have to say a word. She still had on the pink dress with the blood stains, and it was a very difficult time in my life, and even now I have trouble thinking about it and talking about it.
To see the caissons come up the north driveway through Northwest Gate and pick up the president, pretty awesome. Chills went down my spine. I haven't talked about this in years.
Okay, talk about a couple of things here. One is, it's hard